The transport ship broke through the clouds of Prime, and Cole pressed his face against the small window like a child seeing snow for the first time. The planet below was beautiful in ways that made his chest hurt. Crystal towers rose from the surface, catching the light of 3 distant suns and scattering it into rainbows that painted the sky. Rivers of liquid silver wound through valleys of purple vegetation. Mountains floated in the air, held aloft by some technology or magic that human science could not yet explain. Was 29 years old. He had joined the Earth Defense Fleet at 18, worked his way up through the ranks with quiet determination, and earned a reputation as a reliable officer who never complained and never caused problems. He was not brilliant. He was not exceptional. He was simply good at his job and easy to overlook. That was why he was here. Admiral needed a communications technician for the diplomatic mission to Prime, someone who could fix the translation equipment if it broke down, someone who would stand in the background and not draw attention, someone forgettable. Fit the description perfectly. He did not mind being forgettable. He had spent his whole life being the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who faded into the background while others took center stage. His younger sister Emma used to joke that he was like furniture, always there, always useful, never noticed until you needed him. Emma, the thought of her made him smile even now, 30,000 light years from home. She was 26 now, working as a teacher at a school for deaf children in Nebraska. She had been born without hearing, and growing up with her had shaped in ways he was only beginning to understand. He had learned sign language before he learned to read. He had learned to pay attention to faces, to body language, to all the ways people communicated without words. He had learned patience, sitting with Emma for hours as she struggled to understand a world that was not designed for her. He had learned that being different was not the same as being less. These were not skills that appeared on his military record. They were not the kind of things that got you promoted or noticed, but they were part of him, woven into the fabric of who he was. The transport ship descended toward the capital city and pulled himself away from the window. Around him, the other members of the diplomatic delegation were preparing themselves. Admiral was reviewing her notes for the 100th time. Ambassador Perry was practicing his formal greeting, the words clumsy on his human tongue. The security team was checking their ceremonial weapons, which were allowed only because they had been inspected and approved by authorities. Checked his communication equipment one last time. Translation devices, backup power cells, emergency beacon. Everything was in order. Everything was always in order. That was his job. The ship landed with barely a tremor, and the delegation assembled at the exit ramp. Admiral turned to address them one final time. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with an authority that made her seem much larger. Her hair was gray and pulled back in a tight bun. Her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. "This is the most important diplomatic mission in human history," she said, her voice calm but intense. "They are one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. They have ignored humanity for 200 years. They consider us primitive, emotional, and unpredictable. They agreed to this meeting only because we have something they want, and even then, they made us wait 30 years for an audience." She looked at each member of the delegation in turn. "We will not get a second chance at this. Every word we say, every gesture we make, every expression on our faces will be analyzed and judged. They are telepaths. They can sense our emotions even if they cannot read our thoughts. If they detect deception, hostility, or disrespect, this mission is over." Her eyes landed on, and he felt himself stand a little. "Lieutenant Commander Cole, your job is to stay in the background and keep the communication equipment running. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not draw attention to yourself. Do not do anything that could be interpreted as unusual or threatening. Is that understood?" "Yes," Admiral said. "Good," she turned back to the group. "Let us make history." The ramp lowered, and the delegation stepped out onto soil. Had seen photographs of the capital. He had studied the briefing materials until he could recite them from memory, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of standing in this place. The air smelled like flowers and lightning. The ground beneath his feet was not dirt or stone, but some kind of living material that pulsed gently with warmth. The buildings around him were not built but grown, their crystalline structures spiraling upward in patterns that seemed to follow no human logic. And themselves. They were waiting for the delegation at the base of the ramp. A dozen of them, tall and elegant, their skin shifting through shades of silver and blue like the surface of a calm ocean. They wore robes of woven light that moved and changed color with their emotions. Their eyes were large and dark, with no visible pupils, and when they looked at you, you felt seen in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. The leader of the welcoming party stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his skin a deep silver that spoke of age and authority. He did not smile, but something in his posture suggested formal welcome. "Admiral of Earth," he said, his voice resonating strangely through the translation device in his ear. "I am High Counselor. On behalf of Queen and the Empire, I welcome you to our world." Admiral inclined her head in the formal bow they had practiced. "High Counselor, on behalf of Earth and the United Human Coalition, I thank you for this opportunity. We come in peace, seeking friendship and mutual understanding." The formal words continued, each phrase carefully chosen, each response measured and diplomatic. Stood at the back of the group and watched. He noticed things that the others might have missed. The way skin flickered slightly when Ambassador Perry mispronounced a word. The subtle shift in the other postures when Admiral mentioned trade agreements. The constant low hum of telepathic communication passing between them, visible only as faint ripples in the light around their heads. They were talking about the humans even as they talked to them, judging them, assessing them. Kept his face neutral and his thoughts as calm as he could manage. He did not know if they could read his mind, but he suspected they could at least sense strong emotions. He thought about peaceful things. His sister's smile, the wheat fields of Nebraska in summer, the sound of rain on a tin roof. The welcoming party led the delegation through the streets of the capital toward the palace. Citizens stopped to watch them pass, their dark eyes curious and unreadable. Some of them were clearly communicating telepathically, their skin colors shifting in patterns that could not interpret. He wondered what they were saying about the humans, probably nothing flattering. The palace rose before them like a frozen wave, its crystalline walls catching the light and breaking it into a million colors. Guards stood at the entrance, their ceremonial armor gleaming, their weapons elegant and deadly. They parted as the delegation approached, allowing them to enter the grand hall. And what a hall it was! The ceiling rose so high they could barely see it, lost in a haze of golden light. The walls were covered in murals that seemed to move, depicting scenes from history in flowing, dreamlike images. The floor was a single sheet of polished crystal, clear as water, and beneath it could see what looked like an entire ecosystem of glowing plants and small creatures. At the far end of the hall, raised on a platform of white stone, sat the throne, and on the throne sat Queen. She was the most beautiful being had ever seen. Her skin was pure silver, unmarked by the blue tones that colored her subjects. Her robes were made of light itself, shifting through every color of the spectrum in slow, hypnotic waves. Her face was ageless, neither young nor old, and her eyes held the weight of centuries. Felt something stir in his chest. Not attraction exactly, something closer to awe. This was a being who had ruled an interstellar empire for 300 years, who had watched civilizations rise and fall, who held the fate of humanity's future in her elegant, silver hands. He remembered to breathe. The delegation approached the throne following the precise protocol they had practiced. 10 steps forward, stop, bow, wait for acknowledgement, 10 more steps, stop, bow again, wait. counted the steps silently, making sure he stayed in his assigned position at the back of the group. His job was to be invisible. His job was to not exist unless something broke. Queen watched them approach with an expression that revealed nothing. When they reached the final stopping point, she inclined her head slightly. "Admiral," she said, and her voice was like music, like wind through crystal chimes. "I have heard much about humanity. Your species is young, curious, persistent. You have knocked on our door for 2 centuries, and we have always turned you away. Do you know why we finally agreed to this meeting?" Admiral kept her composure, though could see the tension in her shoulders. "I would be honored to learn, Your Majesty." "Because you would not stop knocking," the Queen said. "Because every time we said no, you asked again. Because you sent your ships to the edge of our space and waited year after year, generation after generation, never attacking, never threatening, only waiting, hopping." She paused, and something that might have been curiosity flickered across her face. "We have encountered many species in our long history. Most of them, when faced with our refusal, either attacked us or gave up. Humanity did neither. You simply kept hopping. That is either great wisdom or great foolishness, and I have not yet decided which." Admiral allowed herself a small smile. "Perhaps it is both, Your Majesty. Humans are complicated creatures." "So I have observed," the Queen said. "Very well. Let us see if your persistence has been wisdom after all. We will hear your proposals." The formal negotiations began. Stood at his post and tried to pay attention, but the technical details of trade agreements and diplomatic protocols made his eyes glaze over. He was not a diplomat. He was a communications technician. His job was to make sure the translation devices kept working, not to understand the nuances of interstellar commerce. Instead, he found his attention wandering around the throne room. The advisors stood in a semicircle around the Queen, their skin colors shifting as they communicated telepathically. The guards remained motionless at their posts, so still they might have been statues. The murals on the walls continued their slow, endless dance, telling stories did not understand. And then he noticed the child. She was sitting on a cushion at the edge of the raised platform, partially hidden behind the throne. Had not seen her at first because she was so small and so still, almost like she was trying to disappear. She looked young, perhaps 8 or 9 by human standards, though knew that ages worked differently. Her skin was pale silver, lighter than the Queen's, and her robes were simple compared to the elaborate garments of the court. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her dark eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Remembered the briefing. Princess, the Queen's youngest daughter. There had been a note about her, flagged as culturally sensitive, but he could not remember the details. He watched her for a moment, drawn by something he could not name. There was a stillness about her that felt different from the stillness of the guards. Theirs was the stillness of alertness, of readiness. Hers was the stillness of resignation, of giving up. Knew that kind of stillness. He had seen it in his sister's eyes during the bad years, before she found her community, before she found her voice. One of the advisors spoke, and everyone in the room turned toward him. Everyone except the princess. Her eyes did not move. Her head did not turn. A chill ran down spine. He watched more carefully now, looking for confirmation of what he suspected. Another advisor spoke, and again the princess did not react. Someone walked behind her, close enough that their robes brushed against her cushion, and she showed no sign of noticing. The briefing, the culturally sensitive note, now he remembered. Princess was deaf. Not just deaf in the human sense, unable to hear sounds. Deaf in the sense as well, unable to receive telepathic communication. In a species that relied on mental connection for everything, for nuance and emotion and true understanding, she was completely cut off. His heart broke. He thought about his sister growing up in a world full of sounds she could not hear, the frustration, the isolation, the feeling of being surrounded by people and yet utterly alone. But Emma had eventually found sign language. She had found a community of people like her. She had found ways to connect. What did Princess have? Looked at the court, at their constant telepathic communication, at the colors shifting across their skin as they shared thoughts and feelings instantaneously. How did they talk to a child who could not feel their minds? How did they show her love when she could not sense their emotions? Written language, probably. Cold, impersonal words on a screen. The equivalent of passing notes instead of having conversations. Thought about all the times people had written notes to Emma instead of learning even basic signs. The patience she showed, the understanding, hiding the hurt behind a smile. She never complained. She never demanded that people adapt to her, but he had seen how much it meant to her when someone actually tried. The negotiations continued. Important things were being decided, was supposed to be paying attention. Instead, he was watching a lonely child sitting in the shadow of her mother's throne. Princess's eyes wandered around the room, passing over the advisors, the guards, the human delegation. When her gaze reached, it stopped. Their eyes met across the vast throne room. Saw something flicker in her expression. Recognition, not of him specifically, but of something in him. The way prey recognizes a predator, or a lost traveler recognizes a fellow wanderer. She knew he was watching her. She knew he saw her. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two outsiders in a room full of important people. Two invisible figures in a drama that did not include them. Felt an overwhelming urge to do something, to reach out somehow, to let her know that she was not as alone as she felt. But he had his orders. Stay quiet, stay invisible, do not draw attention to yourself. He looked away. The negotiations dragged on for hours. Complex trade proposals were presented and discussed. Cultural exchange programs were outlined. Technology sharing agreements were debated point by point. Checked his equipment periodically, made minor adjustments to the translation calibration, and tried to ignore the weight in his chest. He kept finding himself looking at the princess. She had not moved from her cushion. Her eyes continued to wander the room, never settling, always searching for something she could not find. Once she caught him looking again. This time, something like curiosity appeared in her expression. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with the intensity of someone who had learned to read the world through observation alone. Understood that look. Emma had the same way of watching people, picking up on details that hearing people missed. Body language, facial expressions. The thousand tiny signals that most people broadcast without knowing. What did Princess see when she looked at him? What did she read in his face, his posture, his eyes? He hoped she saw kindness. He hoped she saw understanding. The first day of negotiations ended with formal pleasantries and promises to continue tomorrow. The human delegation was escorted to a wing of the palace that had been prepared for their use. The rooms were beautiful, the beds comfortable, the food strange but edible. Lay awake that night, staring at a ceiling that glowed softly with bioluminescence, thinking about a lonely princess in a world of telepaths. He thought about his orders. Stay quiet, stay invisible, do not draw attention to yourself. He thought about all the times in his life when he had followed orders, stayed in the background, done what was expected of him. It had brought him here, to the most important diplomatic mission in human history. It had earned him a place, however small, in something that mattered. But what did mattering mean, really? Did it mean standing in a room while important people made important decisions? Did it mean being reliable, forgettable furniture? Or did it mean something else? Did it mean seeing someone who was hurting and reaching out? Did it mean breaking the rules when the rules were wrong? Did not know the answer. He fell asleep still wondering. The second day of negotiations was much like the first. More proposals, more debates, more careful diplomatic dancing. Stood at his post and watched the princess. She was wearing different robes today, a pale blue that made her silver skin seem almost white. She sat in the same spot, folded into herself, her eyes wandering the room with that same resigned hopelessness. Sometime in the middle of the morning session, something changed. One of the advisors made a comment that could not quite follow, something about human emotional instability. The other shifted colors, a ripple of what interpreted as amusement passing through them. The translation device rendered it as a dry, factual statement, but the body language was clear. They were laughing at humanity. Admiral's face remained carefully neutral, but saw her hands tighten slightly on her tablet. Ambassador Perry's smile became fixed. The security team shifted their weight, a subtle sign of discomfort. The humans were being mocked, and they could not respond without risking the entire negotiation. Looked at the princess. She had not reacted to the exchange because she had not heard it. She did not know that her mother's court was belittling the visitors. She simply sat there, isolated, while everyone around her shared a joke at humanity's expense. Something twisted in his chest, something that felt like anger and something that felt like recognition. He knew what it was like to be left out of the joke, to sit in a room full of laughing people and not understand why. Emma had described that feeling to him once, tears running down her face. The worst part is not the words you miss, she had signed. The worst part is knowing that everyone else is sharing something and you will never be part of it. Made a decision. He did not think about it carefully. He did not weigh the consequences. He simply acted, driven by an instinct deeper than orders or protocol. He raised his hand. Not high, not dramatically. Just enough that the princess, who was looking in his general direction, might notice. Her eyes found him, her head tilted. Formed a sign. The first sign Emma had ever taught him, all those years ago in a small farmhouse in Nebraska. Hello. The princess went completely still. His heart was pounding. What was he doing? She did not know human sign language. This was pointless, reckless, stupid. But something in him would not let him stop. He signed again, slowly and clearly. My name is. He pointed at himself as he spelled out his name, letter by letter. Then he pointed at her and made a questioning gesture. What is your name? The princess stared at him. Her dark eyes were wide, her silver skin flickering with colors could not interpret. She looked shocked. She looked confused. She looked seen. Held his breath. Slowly, hesitantly, the princess raised her hands from her lap. She did not know human signs. She could not possibly know them. But she understood what he was doing. She understood that someone was trying to talk to her, directly to her, using nothing but hands and eyes and intention. She pointed at herself and made a gesture, a flowing motion of her fingers, graceful and uncertain at the same time, her name. Grinned, he could not help it. The smile spread across his face like sunrise over the Nebraska plains. He heard gesture, the flowing motion that meant and pointed at her. Then he pointed at himself and his name again, Nathan. The princess's face transformed. The resignation, the hopelessness, the resigned stillness, all of it fell away. In its place was something recognized from his sister's face, from the faces of Emma's students when they discovered that communication was possible after all. Joy, pure, overwhelming, incredulous joy. She is fingerspelling, her silver fingers forming the unfamiliar shapes awkwardly. Nathan, she got some of the letters wrong, but it did not matter. She was trying. She was reaching back. His eyes were burning. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain his composure, trying to remember that he was in the middle of an important diplomatic mission and not standing in a classroom back home. He signed friend. He pointed at himself, then at her, and made the sign again. Friend. The princess studied the gesture, her brow furrowing in concentration. Then her movements becoming more confident. Friend. She pointed at herself at him and signed it again. Friend, friend, friend. She was laughing now, a silent laugh that shook her shoulders and lit up her face. She had probably never laughed like this in front of the court before. She had probably learned to hide her emotions, to keep her face neutral, because no one could share them anyway. But now someone could see her. Someone was watching, someone cared. Did not realize that the negotiations had stopped until he felt the weight of silence pressing down on him. He looked up. Every eye in the throne room was fixed on him. Admiral's face had gone pale. Ambassador Perry looked like he might be sick. The security team had their hands near their weapons, though they had not drawn them. The advisors were staring at with expressions he could not read. Their skin colors were shifting rapidly, a storm of telepathic communication passing between them. And Queen was rising from her throne. His legs went weak. He had done it now. He had destroyed everything. 200 years of patient diplomacy, 30 years of waiting for this meeting, and he had ruined it all because he could not keep his hands still. He thought about Admiral's orders. Stay quiet, stay invisible, do not draw attention to yourself. He had done the opposite of all three. The Queen descended the steps from her platform, her silver robes flowing behind her like liquid metal. She did not look at the human delegation. She did not look at her advisors. Her eyes were fixed on with an intensity that made him want to run. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the faint patterns of light moving beneath her silver skin, close enough that he could feel the hum of her presence, a vibration that was not quite sound. She was taller than him by almost a head. She looked down at him with eyes that had watched empires rise and fall. Then she turned and looked at her daughter. Princess had risen from her cushion. She was standing at the edge of the platform, her hands still moving, signing the word friend over and over again. Her face was radiant with happiness. Her eyes were fixed on. The Queen's expression shifted, watched the colors move across her skin, saw the micro-expressions flicker across her face, and tried to understand what she was feeling. He could not read her the way he could read humans, but he saw something that looked like confusion, something that looked like wonder, something that looked like pain. She spoke, and her voice was quiet, stripped of the musical formality she had used during the negotiations. "What are you doing to my daughter?" Swallowed hard, his voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "I am talking to her, Your Majesty." Talking to her. The Queen repeated the words as if they were foreign, as if they did not make sense. How? She cannot hear. She cannot feel our minds. She cannot understand. "With my hands," said, "with my face, with my body." He demonstrated, turning slightly so the Queen could see. He signed hello to the princess, and the princess signed it back, her silver fingers moving with growing confidence. The Queen watched. Her skin flickered through colors had never seen in the briefing materials, shades that did not have names in human languages. "What is this?" she asked. "It is called sign language," said. "Where I come from, many people are born without hearing. They cannot perceive sound the way others do. For thousands of years, they developed ways to communicate using gestures instead of spoken words. My younger sister was born deaf. I learned sign language so I could talk to her." The Queen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was even quieter than before. "You have a sister who cannot hear." "Yes, Your Majesty." "And you learned a different language, a language of movement and gesture, so that you could reach her." "Yes, Your Majesty." The Queen turned back to her daughter. Princess was watching them, her eyes moving between her mother's face and hands, trying to follow a conversation she could not hear. "For 40 years," the Queen said slowly, "I have watched my daughter grow up in silence, not the silence of peace but the silence of isolation. She sits in this court, surrounded by people who love her, and she cannot feel our love. She cannot hear our words. She cannot know our thoughts." Her voice cracked slightly, and saw silver tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "We have tried everything, our greatest healers, our most advanced technology, experimental treatments from a dozen different worlds. Nothing has worked. Nothing has ever worked. She is trapped inside herself and we cannot reach her. Felt his own eyes burning again. He thought about his parents, staying up late to learn sign language after Emma was diagnosed. He thought about the hours they spent practicing, making mistakes, trying again. The determination to reach their daughter no matter what it took. Some parents would have given up. Some parents would have sent Emma to an institution, let someone else deal with the problem. His parents had never even considered it. He looked at Queen, at the tears running down her silver cheeks, and saw the same love, the same desperation, the same refusal to give up on her child. "Your Majesty," said carefully, "may I have your permission to approach the princess?" The Queen hesitated. She looked at her advisors who were watching the scene with expressions could not read. She looked at the human delegation who were watching with expressions could read very well: terror, confusion, desperate hope. She looked back at. "Yes," she said, "you may." Walked toward the platform where the princess stood. He moved slowly, keeping his hands visible, aware that every eye in the room was tracking his movements. The guards shifted slightly but did not stop him. He climbed the steps and stopped a few feet from the princess. She was watching him with an intensity that reminded him painfully of Emma, watching his face, his hands, his body language, reading him in ways that hearing people never understood. He knelt, bringing himself down to her eye level. She blinked, surprised by the gesture. Her mother was a queen. People did not kneel to princesses in this court. People stood at attention, maintained their distance, showed respect through formality and deference. Did not care about formality. He cared about connection. He raised his hands and signed slowly. "I want to teach you." He pointed at himself, made the sign for teach, and pointed at her. "Words, many words, so we can talk." The princess watched his hands with fierce concentration. She did not understand every gesture, but she understood enough. She understood that he was offering something precious. A bridge, a way out of her isolation. She raised her hands and signed back. The gestures were clumsy, improvised, but her meaning was clear. "Yes, please teach me." Smiled. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her small silver hands in his. Her skin was cool against his, smooth as polished metal. He could feel a faint vibration beneath the surface, the hum of whatever biological processes kept it alive. She did not pull away. She watched him with those dark, desperate eyes. He positioned her fingers gently, shaping them into the sign for friend. Then he made the sign himself, showing her that they matched. "Friend," he mouthed, knowing she could read his lips even if she could not hear his voice. "You and me, friends." The princess made the sign again, her fingers positioned correctly this time. "Friend." Her lips moved, copying the shape of the word. "Friend." Behind him heard a sound. A sob quickly stifled. He turned and saw Queen crying openly now, silver tears streaming down her face. She was not trying to hide them. She was watching her daughter communicate, truly communicate, for perhaps the first time in 40 years. The advisors were silent. Their skin colors had settled into a deep blue that had not seen before. He did not know what it meant, but something told him it was important. Admiral had stepped forward slightly, her expression shifting from terror to something like wonder. Ambassador Perry's mouth was hanging open. The security team had relaxed their postures, though they still looked confused. Stood and faced the Queen. He did not know what to say. He did not know if he was about to be executed or rewarded or something in between. The Queen walked toward him, her silver robes flowing across the crystal floor. She stopped in front of him, closer than protocol allowed, and looked into his eyes. She was crying. A queen of a 300-year-old empire, standing in her own throne room, weeping in front of her court and a delegation of aliens. "How," she whispered, "how can your people talk without speaking? How can you communicate without telepathy? Thought about his sister. He thought about his parents. He thought about all the deaf people he had known throughout his life, all the ways they had found to connect across the silence. Humans are adaptable, Your Majesty, he said. When we cannot do something one way, we find another way. When one door closes, we look for windows. When we lose one sense, we sharpen the others. It is not something we are taught. It is something we are. He looked at the princess, who was still practicing the sign for friend, her face glowing with happiness. Your daughter is not broken, he said. She does not need to be fixed. She just needs a language she can use, and I think, with your permission, I can help her find one. The queen stared at him for a long moment. The colors shifting across her skin were impossible to read, a storm of emotions that no human could interpret. Then she did something unexpected. She bowed. Not a formal inclination of the head, like the gesture she had given Admiral. A true bow, deep and respectful, from a queen to a junior officer from a primitive species she had dismissed for 200 years. When she straightened, her expression had changed. The cold formality was gone. In its place was something warm, something raw, something human. You knelt to my daughter, she said. You made yourself small so she could see you clearly. You used your body to speak when your voice could not reach her. Did not know what to say, so he said nothing. The queen turned to Admiral, who looked like she might faint at any moment. We have misjudged your species, the queen said. Her voice carried across the throne room, reaching every corner. We thought humans were primitive because you lacked telepathy. We thought you were limited because you rely on crude vibrations in the air to communicate. We were wrong. She gestured at the princess, at the scene that had just unfolded. You have developed languages for those who cannot hear. You have found ways to connect across barriers that we, with all our gifts, never thought to cross. You build bridges where we see only walls. Admiral found her voice. Your Majesty, we are honored by your words. Do not be honored yet, the queen said. I have a proposal, something that goes beyond trade agreements and cultural exchanges. The throne room was silent. Every human waited to hear what the queen would say. I want this human, the queen said, pointing to remain on Prime. I want him to teach my daughter his language of hands and faces. I want him to give her a voice. His heart stopped. In exchange, the queen continued, the Empire will open full diplomatic relations with Earth, trade agreements on favorable terms, technology sharing that your species has sought for 2 centuries, access to the galactic networks that we have you, everything you came here hopping to achieve, and more. Admiral's eyes widened. Ambassador Perry made a choking sound. The security team exchanged glances. This was more than they had dared to hope for. This was more than anyone had imagined possible. A single meeting, a single gesture, and humanity was being offered everything it had wanted for 200 years. There is one condition, the queen said. Everyone tensed. This human, this Cole, must agree willingly. I will not have him forced into service. I will not have him resent my daughter as an obligation. If he stays, it must be because he chooses to stay. All eyes turned to. He looked at the queen. He looked at the human delegation. He looked at the court, the crystal walls, the floating mountains visible through the windows. He looked at the princess. She was watching him with those dark, hopeful eyes. Her hands were still moving, practicing the sign for friend, as if she was afraid that if she stopped, the connection would break and she would be alone again. Thought about his orders: stay quiet, stay invisible, do not draw attention to yourself. He thought about his sister, on a planet 30,000 light-years away, teaching deaf children to find their voices. He thought about what it meant to be human, not the biology, not the genetics, but the choice to reach out, the choice to connect, the choice to see someone who was invisible and say, I am here, you are not alone. He signed his answer before he spoke it. Yes, yes, he said out loud for the benefit of those who could not see his hands. I will stay. I will teach her. It would be my honor. The princess made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. A cry of joy that came from somewhere deep in her chest. She ran down the steps and threw herself into his arms. He caught her, holding her carefully, feeling her small body shake with silent sobs. Her hands clutched at his uniform, holding on as if she was afraid he would disappear. He signed against her back, where she could feel the movement of his fingers. It is okay, I am here, I am not going anywhere. She pulled back and looked at his face, reading his expression, his eyes, the truth written in every line of his body. Then she smiled, and it was like watching a sunrise, like seeing a flower bloom, like hearing music for the first time. Queen approached them slowly. Her silver tears had dried, leaving faint trails on her skin. She looked at her daughter, held in the arms of a human stranger, smiling for the first time in decades. Thank you, she said too. Her voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing her. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for being the kind of creature who would break the rules to help a lonely child. Did not know how to respond to gratitude from a queen. He settled for honesty. My sister taught me that everyone deserves to be heard, he said, even if they cannot hear themselves. The queen nodded slowly. She reached out and touched her daughter's hair, a gesture of love that transcended species or culture. Then she turned to face the throne room. Let it be known throughout the empire, she announced, her voice strong and clear. From this day forward, the people consider humanity to be our allies and our friends. What was closed is now open. What was is now granted. Let no one say that we cannot learn from those we once dismissed. The advisors bowed. The guards bowed. Even the murals on the walls seemed to shift, their flowing images changing to include something new. Humans and standing together, hands clasped, eyes meeting. Admiral stepped forward, her composure finally restored. Your Majesty, on behalf of Earth and the United Human Coalition, we accept your generous offer with profound gratitude. We look forward to a long and fruitful partnership between our peoples. The formal words flowed back and forth, but barely heard them. He was still holding the princess, still feeling her small hands clutching his uniform, still processing the impossible thing that had just happened. He had broken his orders. He had drawn attention to himself. He had done exactly what he was told not to do. And somehow, against all odds, it had been the right thing to do. That evening, after the formal announcements and the diplomatic celebrations and the endless rounds of congratulations, found himself alone in a garden at the edge of the palace. The three suns of Prime were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. The floating mountains caught the light and scattered it like jewels. He sat on a bench made of living crystal and watched the day end. He should have been happy. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he felt tired and overwhelmed and more than a little scared. He had just agreed to stay on an alien planet, 30,000 light years from home, to teach a language he had learned as a child to a princess he had just met. He had just changed the course of human history because he could not watch a lonely child be ignored. What was he thinking? He heard footsteps behind him, light, hesitant footsteps. He turned and saw Princess standing at the entrance to the garden. She was alone, without guards or attendants, wearing simple robes that made her look like any other child. She raised her hand and waved, a human gesture, something she must have seen him do. Smiled and waved back. She approached slowly, carefully, as if she was afraid he might disappear if she moved too fast. When she reached the bench, she sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. For a moment they simply sat there, watching the sunset together. Then the princess raised her hands and signed, awkwardly but recognizably, the word she had been practicing all day. Friend. Signed back, his movement slow and clear. Yes, friend, always friend. She smiled, that sunrise smile, and leaned her head against his shoulder. Looked up at the alien sky, at the three suns sinking below the horizon, at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening purple. He thought about his sister, so far away. He thought about his family, his friends, the life he was leaving behind. He thought about all the things he would miss and all the things he would never see again. But he also thought about the child beside him, warm against his shoulder, finally not alone. And he knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. The first sun disappeared below the horizon, then the second, then the third. The stars came out, brilliant and countless, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere out there among those stars was Earth, was home, was everything it ever known. But here, on this alien world, sitting beside a lonely princess who was finally learning to speak, realized something important. Home was not a place. Home was a connection. Home was wherever you chose to belong. He belonged here now. He belonged to this child who needed him, to this world that was opening its doors, to this impossible future that was just beginning. The princess signed something new, a question formed with uncertain fingers. Stay. Signed back, his answer simple and absolute. Stay forever, promise. She smiled again, that beautiful sunrise smile, and closed her eyes. They sat there together as the stars wheeled overhead, two strangers from different worlds, connected by a language of hands and hearts. And somewhere, 30,000 light-years away, Emma Cole sat in her classroom, teaching deaf children to find their voices, never knowing that her brother was doing the same thing on the other side of the galaxy. Never knowing that everything she had taught him, every sign and every lesson and every moment of patience and love, had just changed the fate of worlds. But that was the thing about kindness. You never knew how far it would travel. You never knew whose life it would change. You just reached out and hoped and trusted that the universe would take care of the rest. Closed his eyes and listened to the silence. Not the silence of isolation, but the silence of peace. The silence of finally belonging. The silence of home,